双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
Castle Rackrent by Maria Edgeworth, with an introduction by and Thackeray Ritchie. Introduction. The story of the Edgeworth family, if it were properly told, should be as long as the Arabian Nights themselves, the 1,001 cheerful, intelligent members of the circle, the amusing friends and relations, the charming surroundings, the cheerful, hospitable home, all go to make up an almost unique history of a county family of great parts and no little character. The Edgeworths were people of good means and position, and their rental, we are told, amounted to nearly £3,000 a year. At one time there was some talk of a peerage for Mr. Edgeworth, but he was considered too independent for a peerage. The family tradition seems to have been unconventional and spirited always. There are records still extant in the present Mr. Edgeworth's possession, papers of most wonderful vitality for parchment, where you may read passionate remonstrances and adjurations from great-grandfathers to great-great-grandfathers, and where great-great-grandmothers rush into the discussion with vehement spelling and remonstrance, and make matters no better by their interference. I never read more passionately eloquent letters and appeals. There are also records of a pleasanter nature, merrymakings, and festive preparations, and 12s.
60.
For a pair of silk stockings for Miss Margaret Edgeworth to dance in, carefully entered into the family budget. All the people whose portraits are hanging up, beruffled,
Dignified, come,
and periwigged, on the old walls of Edgeworthstown certainly had extraordinarily strong impressions, and gave eloquent expression to them. I don't think people could feel quite so strongly now about their own affairs as they did then. There are so many printed emotions, so many public events, that private details cannot seem quite as important. Edgeworths of those days were farther away from the world than they are now, dwelling in the plains of Longford, which as yet were not crossed by iron rails. The family seems to have made little of distances, and to have ridden and posted to and fro from Dublin to Edgeworthstown in storm and sunshine.
2.
When Messrs. Macmillan asked me to write a preface to this new edition of Miss Edgeworth's stories, I thought I should like to see the place where she had lived so long, and where she had written so much. And so it happened that being in Ireland early this year, my daughter and I found ourselves driving up to Broadstone Station one morning in time for the early train to Edgeworthstown. As we got out of our cab, we asked the driver what the fare should be. "Sure, the fare is £half-a-crown," said he, "and if you wish to give me more, I could keep it for myself." The train was starting and we bought our papers to beguile the road. "Will you have a home rule paper or one of them others?" said the newsboy, with such a droll emphasis that we couldn't help laughing. "Give me one of each," said I. Then he laughed, as no English newsboy would have done. We went along in the car with a sad couple of people out of a hospital, compatriots of our own, who had been settled 10 years in Ireland, and were longing to be away. The poor things were past consolation,
dull,
despairing, ingrained English, sick and suffering and yearning for Brixton, just as other aliens long for their native hills and moors. We travelled along together all that spring morning by the blossoming hedges and triumphal arches of flowering May. The hills were very far away, but the lovely lights and scents were all about and made our journey charming. Maynooth was a fragrant vision as we flew past, of vast gardens wall-enclosed, of stately buildings. The whole line of railway was sweet with the May flowers, and with the pungent and refreshing scent of the turf, bogs. The air was so clear and so limpid that we could see for miles, and short-sighted eyes needed no glasses to admire with. Here and there a turf cabin, now and then a lake placidly reflecting the sky. The country seemed given over to silence. The light sped unheeded across the delicate browns and greens of the bog fields, or lay on the sweet, wonderful green of the meadows. One dazzling field we saw full of dancing circles of little fairy pigs with curly tails. Everything was homelike, but not England. There was something of France, something of Italy in the sky, in the fanciful tints upon the land and sea, in the vastness of the picture, in the happy sadness and calm content which is so difficult to describe or to account for. Finally, we reached our journey's end. It gave one a real emotion to see EDGWRTHSTOWN written up on the board before us, and to realize that we were following in the steps of those giants who had passed before us. The master of Edgeworthstown kindly met us and drove us to his home through the outlying village, shaded with its sycamores, underneath which pretty cows were browsing the grass. We passed the Roman Catholic Church, the great iron crucifix standing in the churchyard. Then the horses turned in at the gate of the park, and there rose the old home, so exactly like what one expected it, that I felt as if I had been there before in some other phase of existence. It is certainly a tradition in the family to welcome travelers. I thought of the various memoirs I had read, of the travelers arriving from the north and the south and the west, of Scott and Lockhart, of Pictet, of the Ticknors, of the many visitants who had come up in turn, whether it is the year 14 or the year 94. The hospitable doors open kindly to admit them. There were the French windows reaching to the ground, through which Maria used to pass on her way to gather her roses. There was the porch where Walter Scott had stood. There grew the quaint old-fashioned bushes with the great pink peonies in flower. By those railings which still divide the park from the meadows beyond, there spread the branches of the century-old trees. Only last winter they told us the storms came and swept away a grove of beeches that were known in all the country round, but how much of shade, of flower, still remain? The noble hawthorn of stately growth, the pine trees, there should be names for trees, as there are for rocks or ancient strongholds. Mr. Edgeworth showed us the oak from Jerusalem, the grove of cypress and sycamore, where the beautiful depths of ground ivy are floating upon the debris, and soften the gnarled roots, while they flood the rising banks with green. Mr. and Mrs. Edgeworth brought us into the house. The ways go upstairs and downstairs, by winding passages and side gates. A pretty domed staircase starts from the central hall, where stands that old clock case which Maria wound up when she was over 80 years old. To the right and to the left along the passages were rooms opening from one into another. I could imagine Sir Walter's kind eyes looking upon the scene, and Wordsworth coming down the stairs, and their friendly entertainer making all happy, and all welcome in turn, and their hostess, the widowed Mrs. Edgeworth, responding and sympathizing with each. We saw the corner by the fire where Maria wrote. We saw her table with its pretty curves standing in its place in the deep casements. Miss Edgeworth's own room is a tiny little room above, looking out on the back garden. This little closet opens from a larger one, and then by a narrow flight of stairs leads to a suite of ground floor chambers, following one from another, lined with bookcases and looking on the gardens. What a strange fellow feeling with the past it gave one to stand staring at the old books, with their paperbacks and old-fashioned covers, at the gray boards, which were the liveries of literature in those early days, at the first editions, with their inscriptions in the author's handwriting, or in Maria's pretty calligraphy. There was the Pirate in its original volumes, and Mackintosh's memoirs, and Mrs. Barbauld's essays, and Descartes' essays, that Arthur Hallam liked to read, Hallam's Constitutional History, and Rogers's poems, were there all inscribed and dedicated. Not less interesting were the piles of magazines that had been sent from America. I never knew before how many magazines existed even those early days. We took some down at hazard and read names, dates, and initials. Storied urn and monumental bust do not bring back the past, as do the books which belong to it. Storied urns are in churches and stone niches, far removed from the lives of which they speak. Books seem a part of our daily life, and are like the sound of a voice just outside the door. Here they were, as they had been read by her, stored away by her hands, and still safely preserved, bringing back the past with, as it were, a cheerful, encouraging greeting to the present. Other relics there are, of course, but, as I say, none which touch one so vividly. There is her silver inkstand, The little table her father left her on which she wrote, it had belonged to his mother before him. There is also a curious trophy table which was sent to her from Edinburgh, ornamented by promiscuous views of Italy, curiously inappropriate to her genius. But not so the inscription, which is quoted from Sir Walter Scott's preface to his collected edition, and which may as well be quoted here, without being so presumptuous as to hope to emulate the rich humor, the pathetic tenderness, and admirable truth which pervade the works of my accomplished friend. Sir Walter wrote, I felt that something might be attempted for my own country of the same kind as that which Miss Edgeworth so fortunately achieved for Ireland. In the memoirs of Miss Edgeworth there is a pretty account of her sudden burst of feeling when this passage, so unexpected, and so deeply felt by her, was read out by one of her sisters, at a time when Maria lay weak and recovering from illness in Edgeworthstown. Our host took us that day, among other pleasant things, for a marvelous and delightful flight on a jaunting car, to see something of the country. We sped through storms and sunshine, by open moors and fields, and then by villages and little churches, by farms where the pigs were standing at the doors to be fed, by pretty trim cottages. The lights came and went. As the mist lifted, we could see the exquisite colors, the green, the dazzling sweet lights on the meadows, playing upon the meadowsweet and elder bushes. At last we came to the lovely glades of Carriglass. It seemed to me that we had reached an enchanted forest amid this green sweet tangle of ivy, of flowering summer trees, of immemorial oaks and sycamores. A squirrel was darting up the branches of a beautiful spreading beech tree. A whole army of rabbits were flashing with silver tails into the brushwood. Swallows, blackbirds, peacock, butterflies, dragonflies on the wing. A mighty sylvan life was roaming in this lovely, orderly wilderness. The great Irish kitchen garden, belonging to the house, with its 7 miles of wall, was also not unlike a part of a fairy tale. Its owner, Mr. Lefroy, told me that Miss Edgeworth had been constantly there. She was a great friend of Judge Lefroy. As a boy he remembered her driving up to the house and running up through the great drawing-room doors to greet the judge. Miss Edgeworth certainly lived in a fair surrounding, and, with Sophia Western, must have gone along the way of life heralded by sweetest things, by the song of birds, by the gold radiance of the buttercups, by the varied shadows of those beautiful trees under which the cows gently tread the grass. English does not seem exactly the language in which to write of Ireland, with its sylvan wonders of natural beauty. Madame de Sevigne's descriptions of her woods came to my mind. It is not a place which delights one by its actual sensual beauty, as Italy does. It is not as in England, where 1,000 associations link one to every scene and aspect. Ireland seems to me to contain some unique and most impersonal charm, which is quite unwritable. All that evening we sat talking with our hosts round the fire, for it was cold enough for fire. And I remembered that in Miss Edgeworth's memoirs it was described how the snow lay upon the ground and upon the land, when the family came home in June to take possession of Edgeworthstown. As I put out my candle in the spacious guest chamber, I wondered which of its past inhabitants I should wish to see standing in the middle of the room. I must confess that the thought of the beautiful Honora filled me with alarm, and if Miss Seward had walked in her pearls and satin robe, I should have fled for my life. As I lay there experimentalizing upon my own emotions, I found that, after all, natural simple people do not frighten one whether dead or alive. The thought of them is ever welcome. It is the artificial people who are sometimes one thing, sometimes another, and who form themselves on the weaknesses and fancies of those among whom they live, who are really terrifying. The shadow of the bird's wing flitted across the window of my bedroom, and the sun was shining next morning when I awoke. I could see the cows, foot deep in the grass under the hawthorns. After breakfast, we went out into the grounds and, through an arched doorway, into the kitchen garden. It might have been some corner of Italy or the south of France. The square tower of the granary rose high against the blue. The gray walls were hung with messy fruit trees. Pigeons were darting and flapping their wings. gardeners were at work. The very vegetables were growing luxuriant and romantic and edged by thick borders of violet pansy. Crossing the courtyard, we came into the village street, also orderly and whitewashed. The soft, limpid air made all things into pictures. Into Turners, into Titians. A Maria-like boy, with dark eyes, was leaning against a wall, with his shadow, watching us go by. Strange old women, with draperies round their heads, were coming out of their houses. We passed the post office, the village shops, with their names, the Monahans and Gerodys, such as we find again in Miss Edgeworth's novels. We heard the local politics discussed over the counter with a certain aptness and directness, which struck me very much. We passed the boarding house, which was not without its history, a long, low building erected by Mr. and Miss Edgeworth for a school, where the Sandfords and Mertons of those days were to be brought up together, a sort of foreshadowing of the high schools of the present. Mr. Edgeworth was, as we know, the very spirit of progress, though his experiment did not answer at the time. At the end of the village street, where two roads divide, we noticed a gap in the decent roadway, a pile of ruins in a garden, a tumble-down cottage, and beyond the cottage, a falling shed, on the thatched roof of which a hen was clucking and scraping. These cottages Mr. Edgeworth had, after long difficulty, bought up and condemned as unfit for human habitation. The plans had been considered, the orders given to build new cottages in their place, which were to be let to the old tenants at the old rent, but the last remaining inhabitant absolutely refused to leave. We saw an old woman in a hood slowly crossing the road, and carrying a pail for water. No threats or inducements would move her, not even the sight of a neat little house, whitewashed and painted, and all ready for her to step into. Her present rent was 10d a week, Mr. Edgeworth told me, and she had been letting the tumble-down shed to a large family for once.
4d.
This sublet was forcibly put an end to, but the landlady still stops there, and there she will stay until the roof tumbles down upon her head. The old creature passed on through the sunshine, a decrepit, picturesque figure carrying her pail to the stream, defying all the laws of progress and political economy and civilization in her feebleness and determination. Most of the women came to their doors to see us go by. They all looked as old as the hills, some dropped curtsies. Others threw up their arms in benediction. From a cottage farther up the road issued a strange, shy old creature, looking like a bundle of hay, walking on bare legs. She came up with a pinch of snuff and a shake of the hand. She was of the family of the man who had once saved Edgeworthstown from being destroyed by the rebels. Sure it was not her father, said old Peggy. It was her grandfather did it. So she explained, but it was hard to believe that such an old creature had ever had a grandfather in the memory of man. The gleblands lie beyond the village. They reach as far as the church on its high plateau, from which you can see the Wicklow Hills on a fine day, and the lovely shifting of the lights of the landscape. The remains of the great pew of the Edgeworth family, with its carved canopy of wood, is still a feature in the bare church from which so much has been swept away. The names of the fathers are written on the chancel walls, and a few medallions of daughters and sisters also. In the churchyard, among green elder bushes and tall upspringing grasses, is the square monument erected to Mr. Edgeworth and his family. And as we stood there, the quiet place was crossed and recrossed by swallows with their beating crescent wings. 3. Whatever one may think of Mr. Edgeworth's literary manipulations and of his influence upon his daughter's writings, one cannot but respect the sincere and cordial understanding which bound these two people together, and realize the added interest in life, in its machinery and evolutions, which Maria owed to her father's active intelligence. Her own gift, I think, must have been one for perceiving through the minds of others, and for realizing the value of what they in turn reflected. One is struck again and again by the odd mixture of intuition and of absolute matter of fact which one finds in her writings. It is difficult to realize When one reads the memoirs of human beings who loved and hated, and laughed and scolded, and wanted things and did without them, very much as we do ourselves, that though they thought as we do, and felt as we do, only, as I have said, with greater vehemence, they didn't look like us at all. And Mr. Edgeworth, the father of Maria Edgeworth, the gay gallant, the impetuous, ingenious, energetic gentleman, sat writing with powdered hair and a queue, with tights and buckles, bolt upright in a stiff chair, while his family, also bequeued and becurled and bekerchiefed, were gathered round him in a group, composedly attentive to his explanations, as he points to the roll upon the table, or reads from his many MSS and note-books, for their edification, to have 4 wives and 22 children, to have invented so many machines, engines, and kickles, steeples and telegraph posts, is more than commonly falls to the lot of one ordinary man, but such we know was Mr. Edgeworth's history told by his own lips. I received by chance an old newspaper the other day, dated the July 23rd, 1779. It is called the London Packet, and its news, told with long S's and pretty curly italics, thrills one even now as one looks over the 4 short pages. The leading article is entitled Striking Instance of the Perfidy of France. It is true the grievance goes back to Louis XIV, but the leader is written with plenty of spirit and present indignation. Then comes news from America and the lists of new councilors elected. Artemus Ward, Francis Dana, Oliver Prescott, Samuel Baker, while a very suitable sermon on the occasion is preached by the Reverend Mr. Stillman of Boston. How familiar the names all sound. Then the thanks of the members of Congress are given to General Lee, Colonel Moultrie, and the officers and soldiers under their command who on the 28th of June last repulsed with so much valor the attack that was made that day on the state of South Carolina by the fleet and army of His Britannic Majesty. There is an irresistible spirit of old-world pigtail decorum and dash about it all. We read of our grand fleet waiting at Corunna for the Spanish, of 80,000 men on the coast of Brittany supposed to be ready for an invasion of England, of the Prince of Condé playing at cards, with Northumberland House itself for stakes, Northumberland House which he is intending to take. We read the list of lottery prizes, of the L1000 and L500 tickets, of the pressing want of seamen for His Majesty's Navy, and how the gentlemen of Ireland are subscribers to a bounty fund. Then comes the narrative of James Cawdon of Bristol, who writes to complain that while transacting his business on the Bristol Exchange, he is violently seized by a press gang, with oaths and imprecations. Mr. Farr, attempting to speak to him, is told by the lieutenant that if he does not keep off he will be shot with a pistol. Mr. Cawdon is violently carried off, locked up in a horrible stinking room, prevented from seeing his friends. After a day or 2 he is forced on board a tender, where Mr. Tripp, a midshipman, behaves with humanity, but the captain and lieutenant outvie each other in brutality, Captain Hamilton behaving as an enraged partisan. Poor Mr. Cawdon is released at last by the exertions of Mr. Edmund Burke, of Mr. Farr, and another devoted friend, who travel post-haste to London to obtain a habeas corpus, so that he is able to write indignantly and safe from his own home to the London Packet to describe his providential escape. The little sheet gives one a vivid impression of that daily life in 1779, when Miss Edgeworth must have been a little girl of 12 years old, at school at Mrs. Latafiere's, and learning to write in her beautiful handwriting. It was a time of great events. The world is fighting, armies marching and countermarching, and countries rapidly changing hands. Miss Seward is indeeding her elegant descriptions for the use of her admiring circle, but already the circle is dwindling. Mr. Day has parted from Sabrina. The well-known episodes of Lichfield gaieties and love-makings are over. Poor Major Andre has been exiled from England and rejected by Honora, the beautiful Honora, whose blending charms of mind and person are celebrated by one adoring lover after another, has married Mr. Edgeworth. She has known happiness, and the devoted affection of an adoring husband, and the admiring love of her little stepdaughter. All this had been hers. And now all this is coming to an end, and the poor lady lying on her deathbed imploring her husband to marry her sister Elizabeth. Accordingly, Mr. Edgeworth married Elizabeth Sneyd in 1780, which was also the year of poor Andre's death. There is a little oval picture at the National Gallery in Dublin, the photograph of a sketch at Edgeworthstown House, which gives one a very good impression of the family, as it must have appeared in the reigns of King George and the third Mrs. Edgeworth. The father in his powder and frills sits at the table with intelligent, well-informed fingers showing some place upon a map. He is an agreeable-looking youngish man. Mrs. Edgeworth, his third wife, is looking over his shoulder.